Evelyne Heyer is professor of genetic anthropology at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle, where she leads research on genetic evolution and diversity of the human species. Her laboratory is located at the Musée de l'Homme, Museum of Mankind, where she leads a research team in evolutive anthropology. In 1991, she became, with a PhD, a state research in Quebec as a professor, and she came back to France in 1996 and joined CNRS. She received the Bronze Medal of CNRS in 1999, and she was encouraged to put together her team to work on human population genetics in 2003, as she became professor at the Université Paris Diderot. In 2005, she became professor at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle and greatly involved herself in a renovation project of the Musée de l'Homme, where she was appointed Scientific Commissioner General. She renovated Musée de l'Homme, opened in October 2015. Evelyne Heyer is a scientific commissioner for the first big temporary exposition of the new museum, Me and Them, From Prejudices to Racism. In 2010, she was awarded Chevalier de l'Ordre National du Mérite, and in 2017, so just a few months or weeks ago, Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. Her work are on a genetic evolution of our species and its diversity around three axes, tracing back the history of populations, evaluating the importance of natural selection in our evolution, and understanding the interactions between biological evolution and culture. She leads field works in Central Asia and Central Africa and published more than 100 scientific articles. Please welcome Evelyne Heyer.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation, and Happy New Year, because it's still time. So I will start. The topic of my presentation is about progress, and to question if there is a limit. When we think about progress, the first thought is about technological progress, which is represented, for example, here on this chart, but I will not talk about technological progress. I will talk about progress in the sense of evolution, and the idea of progress is the fact that there is evolution in a good direction, in a direction with improved health, improve education and improvement. Indeed, for me, progress is evolution in a good direction, I will say. And I will try to show you from example about our evolution, how we can think now about progress. So our human evolution is classically represented as this linear progress from our ape-like ancestor to nowadays human sapiens. But indeed, this representation is in a way misleading about what we know about human evolution. If you look at a graphic that represents human evolution, at the bottom you have the past and up you have the present. Indeed, human evolution is bushy. That means that there has been trial, success, trial, failure, and there have been a lot of different branches around human evolution. And the ideas of this direction in evolution is due to the fact that we look backward evolution from the perspective of Homo sapiens only, and in this case we have the impression that there is a linear progression, a linear direction in progress, but it does not represent the way the evolution occurs. There is no direction in evolution. And also, something interesting about this picture is that it's only recently that we became the only Homo species on Earth. 40,000 years ago, there were several different Homo species. There were Neanderthal, what is called Denisova, Homo florensis, and of course sapiens. So we are alone on Earth only recently. And so this idea of directional evolution, as I told you, it's first because of the way we look back. It's not the way evolution occurs. So my idea is to present to you through 3 examples how we can think about evolution and progress. The first example is about stature or height. Here is the trend in human height that is known from Paleolithic time on the left, I mean older than 16,000 before Christ, up to now. And if you look at the evolution of human height on a long-term basis, the first thing you can see, it's a strong decrease in height. Okay. Here, at this time in history, which is around what we call the Neolithic Revolution. Indeed, in our past, the first one of the major changes that occur approximately 10,000, 5,000 before present is the invention of agriculture, which is called the Neolithic Transition. All over the world, humans started to use biodiversity, to use plants and animals. Before we were only hunter-gatherer, and at 10,000, 5,000 BP, independently, all over the world, we change the way we perceive and the way we use nature. And this lead to a change in way of living. So if we put the beginning of our species, sapiens, 200,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, you have this shift and the birth of pastoralism and farmer population. And this Neolithic transition is one of the major transitions in our past history. And of course, I will go back later, we have also the Industrial Revolution at the 19th century. So what are the major consequences of this Neolithic transition? The first one is, of course, the change in diet. We start to eat, for example, starch, we start to eat more vegetables, and we start to eat dairy products, milk, and so on. The second change, very important, it's the start of the demographic growth of our species. Before, we were like a small species with not so many individuals. We were not better than apes in terms of demography. But because of the Neolithic transition, our species start to explode from a demographic point of view, and it's really the beginning of the big influence of human on our planet. And third, it's the emergence of what is called sedentary ization, so the emergence of village city. Also, it starts a little bit before the Neolithic transition. Approximately, it's the start of sedentary ization. And of course, with sedentary ization comes the fact that we live in big village city, and that's the beginning that will lead to state, politics, and all of this very important part of our nowadays lives. But also, it leads to new pathogens. Indeed, it's the start of a lot of new infections that did not exist before, like, I forgot the name, rougeole, okay, for those who know, smallpox, sorry, like smallpox and all different pathogens that started at this time. And also because of the domestication of animals, also new pathogens like tuberculosis have been transmitted from animals to human population. So that it's an improved we can see it because there is a strong demographic growth. So from a species point of view, it's a success, but it's also a failure in terms of health because of these new pathogens. So we see clearly a decrease in stature, in height, that is explained mainly by the increase of infection and the deterioration of the health of the population that we can see clearly in a skeleton. So you see in this case, it's one example where it's a progress, of course, in one way, because it's very important for our species to have made this transition to agriculture, but it's also, it has a reverse effect on health. So now let's move to what happened in the last centuries. As you can see in this picture, we only now recover the height that we had in Paleolithic time. So Paleolithic, it's before Neolithic. So it's before 10,000 BC. So we only recover now the height, the stature we had in Paleolithic time. Humans were tall in Paleolithic time. So what are the factors that influence height? There is, of course, health factor, alimentation, diet, and also infection. There is also genetics. There is a genetic evolution about height, and we can explain by genetic differences in height between different populations. And also, new research shows that there is a link between height and GDP in Europe, and also for the Gini index of inequality. That's why people suggest that height could be also a good indicator of good human development in different countries. So here is an example of the variability of height in the world, with, as you know, the taller people are from the north of Europe, the one in pink color. But what's more interesting is that we have now studies that show the change in height in the last 100 centuries, and especially a nice publication last year who shows the change all over the world. The tallest men are the Netherlands, but the biggest gain is in Iran, and it's almost close to 20 centimeters gain of height in only 100 a year. The same phenomena with a woman in South Korea. But what the result also show is, like, if you take a look at the way height increased in the last century, it seems that the curve reached what is called a plateau. That means that there is no more increase in height. So a lot of people are talking now about the fact that perhaps we have reached a limit on height, and that there will be no increase in height in the few next generation. But indeed, most of these studies do not take into account what is called natural selection. Natural selection is evolution through change, but it's a very slow process. It's very slow, so it takes a lot of time for natural selection to occur. And for natural selection to occur, there are three rules that are very important. First, you need variation on the character. So you need to have people tall and small. Third, you need that this character is transmitted to the descendants, which is the case for height. On average, if your parents are tall, you will be tall. And third, it has to be linked to the reproductive success. So, for example, it needs that taller people reproduce more than smaller people. In this case, you will have an increase in height by natural selection. These three rules are very important. That's the rules of evolution, of natural selection. This rule explains why a lot of what people imagine for the future of human are completely wrong. For example, you have people who imagine that we will lose our legs because we don't use them. This is a nonsense from the point of view of natural selection. Like people think that we will have like square eyes because we are looking at screen. Of course, it's a nonsense from the point of view of natural selection. So coming back to height, is there still evolution by natural selection? For this, we know that there is variation. You have people small and people tall. We know that there is transmission to the descendants, but is there a link to the reproductive success? There is only one study that I have found that try to address this question, and they found that tall men have more reproductive success. They compare men without children, which are in red, with men who have at least one child, I mean individual who reproduce at least once. And in every age class, individuals who have less children, who have no children, are smaller, and individuals who reproduce have a higher stature. So that means that the taller you are, the more likely you will reproduce. So that means that there is still selection on height, that height is still evolving by natural selection. And of course, it's a very small process. So how it comes that taller men have a higher reproductive success? It is based on what we know as sexual selection. So sexual selection is the fact that individuals have a higher probability to reproduce because they have more mate, or they are more chosen by the female. And this is a common process that occurs in the animal kingdom. And in most of the species, it's the female who chooses the male for reproduction. And if a male has a character that the female enjoy, he will have a higher reproductive success. And this character will be transmitted to the descendants. Is, for example, what you see in the feathers of some birds that have a high level of ornamentation. It's only because the female enjoys this type of ornamentation, so it's more transmitted to the descendants because the male are more chosen, so they have a higher reproductive success. It's what happened also for height. We know in most of human population that female tend to prefer taller men. And so because of this sexual selection, taller men reproduce better, they transmit their gene better to the next generation, and on the long term, there is a selection for increased height in the different population. This sexual selection also explains some feature, like why in Europe male have barb, okay, which is not frequent all over the world. And it's certainly because of sexual selection. I don't know why, but Paleolithic women enjoy this trait. No, but it's a pure cultural choice. So about the future of height, on short-term evolution, there is evolution because of health and nutrition, and for this, perhaps we have reached a limit in our society, because we have a society where we have a high level of nutrition and health. So for that, for this evolution, which is short-term evolution, I think it could be true that we have reached a limit. Also, we know now that there are other factors that can be involved in height, what is called epigenetic. Indeed, as a summary, a fact that what you are depends not only of your genetic and your environment, but also in the environment in which your mother was living. So there is a transmission of what we call imprinting of the environment from one generation to the next. And now we are living in good health and nutrition, and the new generation have also parents who were living in good health and nutrition environment. So it's, from people say, it's expected that perhaps there will be some increase in height, not because of the good health and environment now, but because of the good health and environment of the past generation. So that's one way that, say, perhaps in this case we will have an increase in even a short-term increase. On the long term, we know the process of natural selection, but this process can only work if there is always a correlation between height and reproductive success. If we don't know why, but the women start to prefer the shorter man, then the natural selection will stop on this progress. And you will see also in different newspapers that there is perhaps the idea of using biotechnology like genetic editing for example, changing this character. But this, we are very far from being able to do it, because indeed we know now that approximately 1,000 genes are involved in the determination of height of an individual. So if you want to start to modify 100 genes at the same time, it's very unlikely that we will be able to do that in any near future. Second example, the life expectancy. As you know, life expectancy has increased strongly in the last 2 centuries. For example, in France, life expectancy was less than 30 years in the 19th century. Now, this does not mean at all that people were dying at 30 years old. It's completely different. It's the expectation of your life at birth. And indeed, if you can look at this graphic, in the early 20th century, the life expectancy has almost doubled and reached 60 years. And this is mainly explained by the reduction in infant mortality. In the 18th century and before, approximately 1 child out of 2 died before reaching 15 years old. So the death rate of children was approximately 50. So if you stop this death rate, then your life expectancy just double. You multiply your 30 by 2 and you reach a 60. So this increase, the first increase in life expectancy, it's not because adults live longer, it's only because children did not die anymore at young age. And this is the first step in the increase in life expectancy. The second step, more recently, is the health improvement for cardiovascular disease and cancer. So in this case, it's really an increase of the life expectancy of adult. But the first increase, it's only a reduction in infant mortality. So what we know now is life expectancy at birth is quite high. In a lot of countries, it's more than 80 a year, especially for women. But there is still a big differences among countries, especially in the way it changes in the last 40 years. Unfortunately, in some countries, the life expectancy decreased, like in some countries in Africa because of HIV infection. But in most of the country, it increased, especially, for example, in Iran, it increased of 20 years. In Eastern Europe, it increased only of 1 year, because indeed it had decreased a lot. after the collapse of the USSR, you have a decrease in life expectancy in Russia that is mainly explained by the death of young adults between 40 and 55 years old men that were more dying because of vodka. And it's the vodka effect. It has been well studied by a lot of demographers, and it's really impressive to show how only the consumption of alcohol had led to such a decrease in life expectancy. And of course, so in this case, you see it was very easy to recover a high life expectancy. They increase the price of the vodka bottle, and you see the effects, the strong effect on life expectancy. No, but it's true, it's really what they decided, and it works. And so it's, you see sometimes economic can have a very quick impact of some biological important parameters. So, of course, life expectancy, there is, like for height, the question of the limit, because if you look at the graphic on the left, here, you can see that in a lot of countries there is like a plateau. Even in the United States, there is a decrease in life expectancy in 2 consecutive years because of obesity and because of the opioid epidemic that really increased the death, the probability of death of adult. But in France, there seems to be a plateau. On the other hand, you can see on the other graph that the number of centenaries seems to increase. About the fact if there is a limit of life expectancy, it's a huge debate now in the discipline. So you have people who think that we have reached a maximum, and the maximum was reached by the French Mrs. Calmet, Jeanne Calmet, who reached 122 years, and this record still holds. So nobody has lived a longer life than her. So that's why people think we have reached a limit. But on the other hand, demographers show that indeed there is a decrease of death rate for old people. So this will increase the life expectancy. So I will say that we do not know now. But what is to me more important, and where there is still progress that can be made, is what the new parameter that is called the life in good health. It's the idea that it's good to live long, but what it's perhaps not so much a progress. A progress would be to live long in good health. And so a lot of people are now working on the parameter of the life in good health. And about the future of life expectancy, it's difficult to know because, as I told you, for height, there is a lot of what we call epigenetic factors. So perhaps the health of our parents and grandparents has an impact on our health now. And so this means that if you look at that, life expectancy is expected to increase. On the other hand, you know that we are submitted to new pollutants like endocrine disruptors, fertilizer, and so on. And about life expectancy, what is very funny if you look at the literature is that you have a lot of dreams about it that are for me very close to science fiction, but that with very funny picture to look at it, like, for example, transhumanism. But indeed, there is another alternative if you want easily to increase life expectancy. And to explain it to you, I just have to go back to our evolution quickly. During our evolution, there is a strong increase in the brain growth at the beginning at the same speed at the height of Homo species, but at the end, a very strong increase of brain growth. At the same time, during evolution, a little bit before, bipedalism occurred, and at approximately 4 million years ago, and this lead to a reduction of the pelvis channel that is represented here. So that means that brain size has increased faster than body size first, and because of bipedalism, the hip have been blocked, and so that the birth from our species is very difficult, it's complex, it's dangerous, it's the most it's more dangerous than in any other primate species, and indeed the maternal mortality is up to 2% in the absence of modern medicine. So there is approximately 800 women that die every day just in order to give birth. So to solve this evolutionary paradox, the fact that the hip have been blocked by bipedalism and the fact that the brain has grown all over our evolution, the solution that has been made in place by natural selection is the immaturity of the newborn. We are born much more immature than any other mammals. For example, a chimp, he leaves its mother at 4 years. For humans, 15 will be a dream, but most of the case it's 25, 35, and so on. So you see there is a strong differences between primate and other humans. And that makes us a very specific species because it has a strong impact of what we call sociality, and the idea that has been developed and validated since by several researchers is that the fact that the new human is completely immature, he needs sociality around him to be raised, and our brain has been strongly developed for this sociality. We are a social species. If you look, for example, in the new development of brain study, newborn only hours after birth have the capacity to recognize a face, and to recognize that it's a human and to recognize a face. And this idea, this importance of sociality in the development of the brain continue all over our development. So we are a social species with a very high level of cooperation. And one of the major specificities of our species is the fact that we cooperate even with non-kin. In a lot of animal species, when there is cooperation, it is explained by the fact that you cooperate with kin, with individuals you are related with. But in human, one of the specificities is that we cooperate with people who are not genetically related with. And studying this idea of the importance of the social connection in our evolution, you have studies that clearly show that the social relationship is very important for your health and for your longevity. In this recent study, it's 2016, they even shown that the fact to live in a social network has the same effect to protect against disease than the difference between smoking and non-smoking. So the importance of the social relationship, and this is easy to work on. You do not need very fancy biotechnology if the aim is really to improve the life expectancy. We know where we can act because of the way we have evolved. So in general conclusion, first, about the question, if we are still evolving, you see, you have to distinguish between the long term and the short term. The long term is the genetic evolution. The genetic evolution, it's we know it exists because as any animals or plants, we are evolving, but we don't know the direction, because the direction depends on the link between the reproductive success and in order to know which way we will evolve, we need to know who reproduce better than others, and this is difficult to know in the future. Is there a direction in this evolution? I think there is a bias towards the backward regards. We have a tendency to see the past as a direction of evolution, also for technological evolution, because I'm not sure we see it as a good way. But what is important, if we want to talk about progress, we have to know if this evolution are positive or no, because any evolution is not a progress. It's a progress only if it is a positive evolution. And in order to assess this, time is very important. For example, if you look at a lot of statistics for the last 2 centuries, you see that globally there is progress. Poverty is decreasing, education is increasing, literacy is increasing, democracy also, vaccination, child mortality is decreasing. So a lot of parameters clearly show that there is evolution in a good way. But what is very, very fancy is that we don't have this perception. And there are a lot of studies now that work on the idea of perception and of the discrepancy between what really happened and the perception. And one thing that is to me very important about this difference between perception and reality is what we call the Tocqueville effect. Is the fact that the closer you go to an ideal situation, the more the discrepancy between what you are and the ideal is important for you. So if your society becomes more egalitarian, any inequality is becoming more important and hurts more than in a society with a high level of inequality. So the closer you reach, what you want to reach, which can be, for example, less poverty, more education, the more any differences between your objective and the real life strike you and is something that you notice. And this is one of the factors that explain in part the discrepancy between the reality and the perception of the reality. Now, just to finish about the new technologies, donc can the biotechnology help us to go beyond limits? There are a lot of new technology like in genetic screening, baby à la carte, DNA editing. Some are already in use, hopefully, for the screening for inherited disorders, for example. DNA editing, now I have seen some recent studies that try to treat people using that. We have also in the new technology intelligence artificial and transhumanism. And I think the basic idea is from technology to progress, we need ethic. So, for example, transhumanism, the way it is designed now, it's not a new technology that will lead to equality. And I think if you want really to transform a biotechnology in a progress, you need to have ethic rules that transform the technology in an ethical way. And for example, artificial intelligence, the things that worry me the most now, because I was in charge of the exhibition about prejudice and racism, we know the importance of stereotype, of prejudice, And artificial intelligence, because it's based on the data you have, you will tend to reproduce and to increase stereotype and prejudice. It has been shown, for example, in the application of artificial intelligence in justice or in the police force in different parts of the US. So I think it's very important to develop an ethic around this different algorithm in order to test to which extent they tend to reinforce stereotypes or not. So what is good is that it's a lot of new job for you, the young generation, because there will be a lot of work to do around that. And just to finish about the technology, what strikes me as an anthropologue is the fascination we have for dystopia. I mean, if you want to make a bestseller, you have to propose a very dark future. If you want to make a movie about future and to sell this movie, you really have to think about something really, really bad. I mean, not a nice future and something where we have solved a lot of problems, where people are in good health and happy with more solidarity and whatever. It's fascinating the way we like so much dystopia. It's really something that fascinates me. It's something you have to be aware of when you start to think about the future, the progress, and the limit, in order to avoid to go to this side that we are very prone to go to. So, in conclusion, part of what I present to you are presented in the Musée de l'Homme and in the collective book Une belle histoire de l'homme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelyne Heyer. We have a few minutes to have some questions. Yes, we have just one. Oh, we have 1, 2, 3 questions already. Yes.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very enriching. I just have one question. How can we define the human species? I mean, do we define it physically, or is it some genetical characteristics? Because there are always newborns who are different from the normal physical definition of human beings. So how can we define a human being? Thank you.
I'm a geneticist, so if I take your DNA, I can tell you if you're a human or not. It's very easy to use. Now, if you look at the skeleton, what we use to study the past, it's clear, you can clearly show, find the shape of the human skull. It's very easy. We have a big head compared to other species with a round head. So for that, we know very easily how to define our species. And even people who are different, but in our species, they share the same DNA.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. That was really approachable. I just had a question quite specific. I was wondering about what you mentioned about height as a factor for natural selection. Is it explained by physiological or cultural factors? What makes it so special now?
One idea beyond that is that a tall man has been raised in a richer environment. So that's why he's tall, because he had more access to resources, and that makes him taller. And so in this case, it's better for a woman to choose a taller man because it reflects a higher wealth situation. That is the first explanation. The second one, which is related only to sexual selection, is if you choose a man who is taller, your son will be taller. and so he will be chosen by the female at the next generation, so he will have a higher reproductive success. So the women who have chosen taller men that were chosen by the others have more reproduction than the one who choose smaller men whose children will be less chosen. So you have these two phenomena, and sexual selection can work independently of any, I would say, advantage for the trait. It can be just a retroaction of choosiness and preference.
You have another question? Back of the room.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I also did my undergrad in Quebec, so it's especially nice to have you here. So I have a couple questions for you. So the first one is, how can we calculate the life expectancy at birth? Because there's just so many variables that's unknown that will happen in the future after the birth. And my second question...
Sorry, repeat it. How, what?
Sure.
How could we calculate the life expectancy? How could we calculate the life expectancy?
At birth.
Okay.
At birth.
Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future.
Okay, this is easy.
Okay. And the second question is, why does it take such a long time for the human species to become independent? Is it because of biological reason or economical reason or some other? And how does it help us, survive and pass on our genes?
I'm sorry.
To become independent according to the chromosomy?
Pardon?
Say again.
Yeah, so I just wonder why it takes a human species such a long time to become independent. I would like to know the reason and how it helps
how
us
long
survive.
it takes for children to become independent?
Why it takes
why?
a long
Why?
time.
Okay, why? It's because we have an immature. We are immature, so it's the solution that has been shaped up by natural selection is the idea that you make a newborn immature so that the brain is still very small, so it can go out easily when you give birth. And after, it will grow all around childhood and up to 15 years, but more in the first year. And to do that, you're immature. So it's like what we call more or less neoteny. It means that you're born younger. In order to be finished, you will need to stay longer in the belly, but this will not be possible because you will be too big to go out. So the solution is you're born immature, and since you are born immature, you need a lot of care to become independent, much more than for any other animal. Where after, for example, the chimps, it takes only 4 years to become completely independent. So that's for the second question. For the first one, life expectancy is calculated from a mortality table. So you calculate at a given point of time what is the death rate for each class of age, and then you calculate the probability given the death rate and the number of individuals in each class of age. This enables you to calculate the life expectancy at birth at a given year.
Hello, thank you so much for this talk. This was great. Have you seen the movie WALL-E?
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying that that's not something we have to be afraid of, where we're all going to get fat and drive around on little chairs and look at screens. You don't think that this is something to be afraid of, because I mean, while it is something that's like obviously fantasy, it does seem somewhat plausible that we could, especially coming from America, where there's certain statistics that are fatter than other places in the world. It seems possible that we could wind up changing into being less physical, less able beings. So you do think that this is not something we have to worry about?
to become more obese. This we can do it easily. There is no problem about that. No, but for example, the idea that we will have short legs because we don't walk anymore, it's not something expected by natural selection. If you want to have shorter legs, you need that people with short legs reproduce better than others, and then generation after generation we will have shorter legs. It's not because we do not use our legs that it will become shorter. So in really, the fact that we get like that, yes, it's possible. It's not natural selection, it's more environmental change, and this is clearly possible.
Last question. Yes.
I was just curious to know about the fact that you mentioned that the life expectancy in France was less than 30 years in the era that you mentioned in your presentation. So I just wanted to know your opinions on that.
About
Just
the
a
fact
little
that
bit
it was
more.
less than...
Yeah, like just a little bit more context on that.
It's
In the
because
US as
at
well.
this time we have a high level of child mortality. More than 50% of the children were dying before reaching 15 years old. And what is very interesting with this data is that it's the oldest data we have for any country. But we see this transition in what we call the developed country. The first, when they reduce child mortality, they increase, and in some cases they double their life expectancy in 150 years. So that's the way you go from 30 to 60 years old. It does not mean that you had no adult before. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Evelyne Heyer. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. That's a great pleasure and honor. Thank you very much.